So when I was first approached to make the film and I read the script, obviously the subject matter, data protection, I think from a public perception point of view, it carries a certain negative connotation with it. How do you make something that's perceived as, it's got a big brother element to it, an intrusion element? How do you give that information across that there's a lot of positive attributes of data protection as well? The idea of a Barclays representative in your home, in your personal space, was actually then going to do the opposite of what the message we were trying to get across. So I thought, well, if she's outside and she's being buzzed in, and that's where I think the most important bit of script we came up with was...
Letting someone into your life takes trust.
Once we've got the script locked down and I've got a good idea of how I'm going to tell that story, the next step is to visualize in a 3D space. And for me, my personal preferred way of working, before we start getting crew involved and artists involved and all that stuff, what I do is I just take I sit down, I look with the script, and I'm literally, in this example where everything was set within a room, I was just building little boxes at home. I had little plastic figures. I've got my camera phone as my camera. And essentially what I'm doing is I'm blocking, which is basically just working out where everyone's going to be at a certain part of that script. Just something as simple as how do I get someone from A, one door, to B, the exit door, and what point are we cutting to what, and who's saying what, and where's everyone standing. So I work all that out. And then once I've got a good idea of how that's all going to work, I then take that to the next level, which is getting that into a storyboard world. And it's at that stage that we get a storyboard artist on, and I articulate my thoughts, and then we get all that on paper. And obviously it's at that stage then that I can then share that with the client. And then once we've all agreed on the storyboards, now you're thinking into a camera world. So then we start thinking 3D space, you're thinking about lenses, you're thinking about lighting. So it's at that stage that you start talking with your cinematographer. Then we start thinking about, what equipment do we need? What lenses do we need? Is the camera going to be moving? Is it going to be static? So all those sort of, the visual look of it starts to come alive then. And then obviously at that stage, we'll get a production designer on board. And then once the production designer's on board, they'll start essentially putting that all together, props and the space, how big it is, and the colors and the look of it. And then it's literally just building all the elements that is going to be what you see as an audience. So whenever you're doing any piece where visual effects is involved, it always naturally adds a layer of complexity. When you're filming live action, it's there in front of you. You can make quick decisions. That's not working. I don't like that. Let's change that. Obviously, when you're working in a green screen environment, you sort of have to be locked into what you think is going to work or not work. And as a director, you're leading that in a sense that it's up to you to know exactly where everything's going to go in a post world, because it's your instructions that determine whether you get it right or wrong in the end. So you're working with your actors, you're telling them, where things they've got to imagine, and it's fine for them because they're used to that imaginative, approach to everything. So for me, it's just about giving as much detail to my crew and people about what they're seeing and how it's going to work and how things are moving. And I think all of that helps them feel comfortable in essentially a green alien environment. So a lot of it is just giving as much information as you can for them to work with. And obviously this is where things like previs works very well. You can build up a mock 3D environment so you know exactly what something's going to look like before you go into it blindly, because obviously the VFX stage is the last stage where you want to be making costly and timely decisions. So obviously with social media now embedded into our viewing habits and how we get information across, and it's embedded in advertising, and whereas before a lot of companies would have a lot of time to think about what their communication is and how they spread that out throughout a year, I think what social media does is it creates trends which companies have to react to very quickly. And the old model of, spending a long time in pre-production and script development and stuff, by the time you've done all that, the trends come and gone. So what we try and do now is we're getting used to working with quick turnarounds, suddenly, and sometimes trends can only be around for a week or two. So as soon as we know that there's a trend, we've got to react quickly to devise and get that out there. And one of the big things that helps us be able to react so quickly is working with crew and cast that you know very well and you've got an established relationship with. Because when you're in the world of having to turn around things quickly. You want to be working with people who you understand their workflows or their tastes or their methods, and that by knowing and working with the same people over a given time, you can shorthand a lot of things that usually take a while to develop in other relationships. In one way, we're living in a very exciting moment of storytelling in a sense of everybody's got access to cameras now and everyone's got access to editing equipment. So I think everyone's used to living in a world where they can take pictures and everyone understands what post-production is. So there's that misconception maybe sometimes where people think, oh, everyone can shoot and everyone can edit now, so why are there such costs involved in production? But what I've found is when you're developing, especially when you're working with brands, and if your brand is coming from a place of premium, when we actually say the word premium, what we're actually talking about is lighting and lenses and production design. And it's usually a combination of these things that give the viewer that sense of premium. And obviously, when I mentioned that, everybody these days has a camera and access to editors, what they don't have access to is the high-end cameras and the high-end lenses. And obviously, there's a reason why big feature films and Hollywood all use essentially 3 or 4 of the same camera and particular lenses, is that they're very expensive. But what they do is they create a very specific look. And it's something that we articulate with premium and quality. On this production here, we're shooting on a red camera with 8K capability. So for us, the more resolution we can shoot in, the easier it is for us in a post-production world, which you wouldn't be able to do with a pro-consumer camera. Essentially, what you'll find is as soon as you start manipulating an image on a pro-consumer camera, the image starts to fall apart, you start getting grain, and then you start straying away from the idea of professional or quality or premium. So again, that's another reason why we use the equipment we use, because it's a tried and tested workflow and it gives a very specific result. There is a lot of work that goes into making something look premium. I mean, there's a reason why car adverts and perfume adverts cost so much money. For example, this shoot that we're about to do, the idea that we're going from room to room, that someone could argue, well, why don't you just go and shoot in a house and get lots of houses and we just shoot in someone's already premium? Why do we have to build and all this stuff? For us, being in a staged environment where we don't have to worry about weather, we can change sets. I mean, even, just blocking out today, we've realized some sets don't work, entrance to doors don't work, so we're forever moving and scaling and changing, and oh, that color doesn't look right, so we change the color. So this is why we do things like this in set world, because we've got access to change things as we want to, and then also we've got full control over everything. We don't have to worry about elements, and we've got full control over our environment. And I think when you're doing something, especially with a quick turnaround, the less complexity you add to it, the easier it is for everybody. So I think for a lot of things like this, the studio environment just works.
So, whether it's to deliver products and services to you and others, or to follow legal regulatory requirements, we'll always be clear and open with you about how and why we're using your data.
And that's a wrap. Woo!